So we will start with a short introduction. Pointeuse, and I hope I'm getting it right, is a bidirectional switch with CV control in 1U format. So it can be used as a 1 input 2 output switch or 2 input 1 output. It has momentary and latch modes, just like this. And it comes with a 1U expander that allows you to use a foot switch and trigger it with your feet. For example, you cannot see the expander here because I have it connected from behind, but it works, as you can see, momentary and latch, which is quite comfortable. So you can use your feet to trigger voices, trigger recording, switch between different elements, and your hands stay free for playing an instrument or tweaking knobs. Those are the basics. Let's have a look at a few examples. A really nice feature of this switch is the fact that when nothing is connected to the input, it will output a constant 5-volt signal that we can use in all sorts of ways. So what we can do, for example, is set a looping envelope on Rampage, just like this, and we can use the end of cycle output to trigger the switch. So let's do this. I will use a longer cable to trigger the switch in latch mode. You can see how it switches here, and of course the length or the duration of the function will decide the frequency or the rate of the switching, or the clock, let's call it. So now we have 5 volts coming out of each of the outputs that we can use, for example, to clock Moog slicer. So let's use the lower input, for example, in the clock input of Moog slicer. And now we can use Moog slicer to sequence the exponential input of Rampage. So the function or the envelope will always change, and this will change the rate or the frequency of this switching, and by that change also the clock. So there is a sort of a feedback loop here. So let's send the common input and output to the exponential CV, which is, by the way, inverted, which means that the higher the voltage, the shorter the function, unlike the rise and fall CV inputs. So now if I run Moog slicer, you can see that it's running, and now I can change for a few steps, make the envelope a bit shorter. So if you look at the switch here, you can see the lights are changing differently now. We can change this a bit. I can make the function by itself a bit longer, so it's a bit slower, something like this. So we get a different clock in this case, or a different rhythm that we have control over with the rise and fall controls here on Rampage. So now let's use the clock output of Moog slicer to drive the voltage block. So Moog slicer has a clock output that I can also divide and multiply, by the way, but in this case it's not needed, to the clock input of the voltage block, and you can see that also it's running again with this unsteady clock or this rhythm of triggers. And we can use also the gates of Moog slicer. I can use a shorter cable for this. The all gates output to trigger the bassimilus. And I have a sequence, a pitch sequence ready on the voltage block. So first of all, let's do something like this. Let's change here. I will use a different cable for the switching here, and this I will send the bassimilus already to the mimeophone, and the mimeophone we will send to the output. Already we can hear it. The mimeophone is for now all the way dry, so we don't hear its effect. But now I can use this sequence, a pitch sequence set on channel 1 to sequence the bassimilus. And again, I have control over this rhythm, over this sequence with the rise and fall controls. Let's use another sequence from the voltage block. So I will choose sequence 2 and let's randomize it for now. Let's use it to modulate or sequence, in this case, the decay time of the basimilus. Very nice. And let's use another sequence, another random sequence, to sequence the attack. So let's take the attack all the way down so it's nice and noisy, and we will sequence it. Now let's bring in the mimeophone. Oh yes. Some halo. Can change the colors or the filter. And again, I have control over this rhythm with the function from Rampage. Let's use the second output from the switch. Again, it will output positive 5 volts to trigger the flip function on the mimeophone. So I will get another cable. So now one time the sequence will advance one step and one time the flip will be triggered. Switch the octaves here of the basimilus, very nice. This we can also sequence. You know what? Let's take sequence 4. And now let's say that one step. Let's connect it already so we can hear the effect. Let's say that step, this one. Let's say that also this step, just to have some higher notes here and there. Very nice, very nice. Let's add another loop. From the looper from Instruo, I have here just an FM voice, sort of a line looping. Let's send it to microcell, and from microcell we go again to the output. Okay, let's start this time by clocking the voltage block with Moog Slicer. So we take the clock output of Moog Slicer to the clock input of the voltage block. Let's randomize already the first sequence, and this will go to the first input of the switch. In this case, we will use the switch as a 2-to-1, 2 inputs, 1 output. Let's already use the switch, take the output to trigger Rampage. Let's see if we have enough triggers. So whenever the voltage block is above a certain voltage, it will trigger Rampage. Let's randomize this again, see if we get something a bit more interesting. Maybe one more time. Okay. Very nice. Okay, so now we have something to trigger Rampage, and let's use Rampage to modulate the VCA of Psych. So Psych is the new oscillator from Instruo. It has 4 saw waves and a built-in VCA with all sorts of modes that you can use to bring in and out the different voices. In this case, I'm just using it to bring in all of the voices together. So we can use Rampage to modulate the VCA. And already you can see here the nice movement. Okay, now Psych will go to the, let's use a longer cable, to the analog filter from Volt that I have here. And from there, let's send it to the Desmodus Versio, the new, or not so new anymore, but a reverb from Noise Engineering. And then from there, let's take it to the output and listen to this. So this is the dry signal for now. So you can hear the envelope from Rampage opening the VCA of Psych. And let's take this all the way wet. Let's have fun here with some reverb. Oh yeah. Okay, now let's have another sequence on the voltage block. Let's randomize it. And in this case, let's have it with less steps. So let's change the length 16, 15, 14, let's say 13 steps. So we will always have some movement. And this we will use to trigger the switch. So again, whenever the sequence will go up a certain voltage, I believe it's 1 volt, but I'm not so sure, it will trigger the switch. The switch is in momentary mode. So as long as the voltage stays above this certain point, it will stay on output or input 2 in this case. But you can see we have it switching. And because this sequence has less steps, it will take a while until they are starting at the same step again. So we have basically a longer sequence. Okay, now let's randomize another sequence here, sequence 3, and use it to modulate the fall time of Rampage, which is again bringing in and out Psych. Let's take the rise a bit down, just to add more movement. Now I have sequence 4 already set with pitch information, and it's also with the clock division, so it will run slower than the other sequences. Voltage block is a really nice module, by the way. Okay, so let's use sequence 4 to change or sequence the pitch of Psych. So basically what's happening here is that the switch is sort of dividing the sequence in 2, and it creates something a bit less repetitive because I'm sending the sequence into one input. The second input is empty, which means it's sort of dividing it by 2, but as you can see, it's not really steady, it's not a repetitive sequence. So we get nice movement that doesn't repeat itself so often. Okay, let's set a looping function on the second channel here, or the first actually, on Rampage, and this will modulate the filter. Okay, now I have on Morphogen some drums that we can use to add some glitchiness, hopefully ambient glitchiness to everything. So first of all, what I will do, I will send it to the new distortion, also from Richard Electronics, one new distortion called Guillotine, which is just lovely, I have to say. So let's send the drums first. It's a stereo distortion, by the way, or dual actually. So let's send this to the distortion, and the distortion can get quite hot. So let's send it first. I will send it to Freak from Volt, but in this case I will use it just for level control. And from there, let's see if the cable is long enough. Yeah, from there we will go to Microcell to add some reverb. And let's go to the output and see what happens. So let's take already Guillotine up. So it will be nice and crunchy. I can show you maybe also how it will sound like. So you can hear the drums. We can set for each of the channels on Guillotine different settings. So I can have, for example, channel left a bit brighter and more distortion on the high frequencies, and channel right something different. So you can hear, let's take the distortion down. Oh man. Now if I add, oh yes, if I add some crunch. Okay, and now what we will do, let's set a few more sequences here on the voltage block. Let's say 5, 6, and 7. I just randomize them. And then one will sequence the gene size. One will sequence the slide. So the gene size will shorten and lengthen the playhead of Morphogen, so how much of the sample of the recorded material it will play, and slide will move this segment through the sample. But I don't want it to play all the time, so let's send sequence 7 to the play input. So now it will just be triggered according to sequence 7. Let's find a nice sweet spot here. Crunch. That was not my belly. Those drums are funny. Okay, so let's send the clock output to one of the inputs of the switch. Let's take this cable here. And now I will take the all gates output and I will send it to the second input of the switch. Again, we will use the switch in this case as a 2-to-1. Let's run Moog Slicer. And now the gate mode, as you can see, I can change the gate mode to add sorts of ratcheting, or basically to multiply the clock for the steps for the all gates. So the clock out will stay the same, but the all gates, as you can see, it's blinking faster. I hope you can see this, are actually being multiplied. So let's send this now from the switch to the clock input of the voltage block. So now this will run the voltage block, and if I switch to the second switch, you can see we have now the clock output, which is slower than the first channel, than the all gates. So we have two different clocks that we can switch between. So let's already randomize the first sequence, and we will use this to trigger. Let's take this one. We will use this to trigger the Basimilus. And I have sequence 2 here set with pitch information that we can use also for the Basimilus. So this will go to the pitch input. Very nice. Now let's listen to this also. I will send it. Let's use a longer cable. I will use microcell. Microcell is in pitch shifting, time stretching mode, which is a quite nice mode. I really like it. Lots of reverb, of course, mix all the way up. Let's have a listen to this. If I take the mix all the way down and the reverb down, this is what we get. So again, the triggers will come from the first sequence, the pitch from the second one. The pitch sequence is shorter also, so it's always changing. And if I add some reverb here on microcell and bring in this pitch shifting, time stretching mode, okay, let's have another sequence on the voltage block, randomize it, and let's use it to sequence the decay. Let's have it also with a different length, so let's say 15 steps. So again, it will always move. And let's use another one, number 4, randomize it again. Let's have this also with different lengths, let's say 14. And this we will use to trigger the switch and switch between the two clocks. So you can see how it moves here, a bit faster and a bit slower. The switch is again in a momentary mode. So as long as sequence 4 stays above a certain level, it will output the slower clock. Other than this, it outputs the quicker clock, the multiplication from Moog Slicer. Okay, now let's do something like this. Let's take the attack of the Basimilus all the way down, all the way to the left, so it's nice and noisy. But I have here the shape control on the microcell is basically a low pass filter to the left, high pass filter to the right. So let's take it to the left a bit. So it's a bit darker. Oh, yes. And now we can use Moog Slicer. It has only 8 steps, unlike here we have 16 steps, so it will be a bit different. I will use Moog Slicer to sequence the shapes, to sequence this filter from the common output. I can send it to the shape, and let's put it here down, to the shape input. Oh yeah. And now we get some movement for the filter. So again, I'm using the switch to switch between two different clocks that are running everything here. They are running the voltage block, which means also the sequence of the Basimilus. I love the Basimilus. Okay, let's add a nice chord step. Hopefully it will be nice chord step with psych. So it's set to a certain chord. It has a internal interval offset, so you can set each of those voices to a different interval. So it's set to a chord. Let's use again Rampage to control its VCA, its internal VCA, which will again just bring the voices in and out in this case. This will go to the Mimiophone. For now it's all the way dry, but soon enough we will add lots of goodness. So this is how it will sound like. I can trigger the Rampage with the manual trigger. And now let's add some reverb even more. We have the internal color control. Let's take the wet all the way up. Play the Mimiophone. So on the Morphogene I have a piano loop, and we will use the switch to switch this loop to two different modules. So first, let's send it to the input of the switch, and let's start with Magneto. So I will take the first output to the left input of Magneto, and from there to the output. Now I have Magneto in shift mode, which means that each of the taps, you will hear it in a second, will add overtones. If I will listen just to the dry signal, this is the original piano loop. Really nice. Let's take it to the half and add the wet signal. So again, we have 4 taps. 2 of them will add overtones, 1 of them will add an undertone. I have some wow and flutter, crinkle, some Magneto magic, of course, tape agents, a bit of low cut. Really nice sound. So this will be the first channel of the switch. The second one, let's start with Guillotine. So again, I will use Guillotine, the new distortion, one new distortion from Ritual Electronics, also from Ritual Electronics, just like the switch. Okay, and from Guillotine, let's go, I will take a longer cable, let's go to Freak. This is a Steiner Parker low pass filter in this case, and from there we will go to the Desmodus Versio, again the reverb, which is not so new anymore, but still amazing reverb from Noise Engineering. Let's just take the drive all the way down for now, and this will go to the output. And again, this will be the second channel. I have the switch set to latch mode, so when I click it once, it will stay on the second channel. Let's take the drive a bit up. You can hear how the distortion, how Guillotine is adding nice harmonics. And it's different than this, so Magneto. So we have 2 different sounds, 2 different colors that we can switch between and have some movement. So what we will do to trigger the switch, we will use the end of splice trigger output from the Morphogene. So whenever the loop is ending, it will send out a trigger that we can use to trigger the switch. So it will route it, it will switch the routing between Magneto and this, and guillotine and the Smodus Versio. But we can make it even a bit more interesting, because this will output a trigger whenever the splice or the gene ends, which means that if I shorten the gene, you can see the switch there is switching a bit quicker. So what we can do, we can modulate this. So I have here the OneU noise tools from IntelliGel that outputs, in this case, sample and hold. So I can use one output to modulate the gene size, and another output I can invert it from the morphogene set, because it's exactly the same, just a bit with a slew to modulate or change the slide. So one for the gene, one for the slide. Sweet spot. I hope you can see the switch here working. You can see the lights. So in this case, again, we use the switch to send one source, this piano loop, into two destinations, having different colors, one with magneto, one with some distortion, a bit of filtering, I can also play with it if I want, and lots of reverb from the Smodus Versio, so it will switch between those two colors. Let's add a nice, hopefully it will be nice, bass loop. I have here, I've recorded the Bassimilus into the looper from Instruo. Let's send it, I need a longer cable. Let's send it to, again, the analog filter from Volt. From there, let's send it to the Mimiophone. And I have the color of the Mimiophone all the way up, so it will mostly work only on the high frequencies. And let's take two red cables and send this to output. This is the loop from the looper. So now what we will do, we will switch between two different sequences. So let's drive the voltage block again with Moog Slicer with the clock output. And now I have sequence 1 and 2 already set with pitch information with the pitch sequence. So let's send them to the switch. Again, we will use the switch in this case as 2 inputs and 1 output, and switch between those two sequences. Now here I have another freak module. This one is loaded with the braids firmware, which means that I have dual braids. So two voices, one will drone, but the other one we will sequence. So let's use the output, the output from the switch to sequence one of the voices, and let's send it already to another freak. I have here another freak, which is in this case a low pass filter, and this we will send to the Mimiophone. For now the Mimiophone is all the way dry, and we will go to the output. Oh yes. And now I can switch between the sequences. So this is one sequence and I can switch between them. So what we will do is this. We will use another channel. We will use sequence 3 of the voltage block. And I will have only step 1 with the voltage all the way up. So only step 1 will output 5 volts and then it will go back to 0, and this we will use to trigger the switch. So with each cycle we will get a new sequence. You can hear it. So now we have a 32-step sequence, but we can make it even more interesting by changing the length of this sequence that is doing the switching for, let's say, for example, to 13 steps. So now both sequences have 16 steps, but the sequence that is doing the switching has only 13 steps, which means that we get something repetitive but with much more movement, because it will always shift a few steps. Let's add the mimeophone already. Oh yeah. So we have a much more interesting sequence from switching the two sequences into one voice. Okay, now even though I'm using here a mono signal into freq is stereo, and we can modulate the cutoff point of each of the channels separately. So let's set 2 looping envelopes on Rampage, use one to modulate one channel and the other to modulate the second channel, and now we have 2 different attenuators. This is the right, this is the left. So I can just play with it like this. And have lots and lots of movement. Okay, I have also a loop on the Morphogene, so let's send this loop to Magneto, just to add some more atmosphere to everything. And from Magneto, let's send it to the distortion, I need a cable. To Guillotine again from Ritual Electronics, a new 1U distortion, really nice. And let's send this to the output. Let's see. So I have a lot of wow and flutter here on Magneto, some crinkle. And some nice distortion. Another thing we can do with the switch is switch between 2 voices. So let's mold, first of all, the clock from the Moog slicer. One will trigger the Bassimilus, and another one will drive the voltage block. This will go to the clock input. Now we'll use another one to trigger one channel of Rampage. So again, we are using the same clock from the Moog slicer. Trigger the Bassimilus, run the voltage block, trigger Rampage. And we will use another one to clock or to sync the mimeophone because we will use it later. Now I have here down another freak from Volt. This one is loaded with the braids firmware, which is based on braids for mutable instruments. So I have here dual braids. Both channels are in seesaw mode. Now it has a built-in VCA as well, so I can use Rampage to open this VCA, for example. And now let's send this already so we can listen to it to one channel of the switch. Again, we will use the switch in this case as a 2 inputs, 1 output. So we will switch between 2 voices and this will go to one destination. So let's listen to this. I will use the mimeophone. Let's send the output to the mimeophone. And let's send the mimeophone to the output. This is the voice. For now, mimeophone is all the way down, all the way dry. So let's use one sequence of the voltage block. I will just randomize it to sequence the fall times. So let's send it to Rampage. I have here another sequence set with pitch information. Let's use this to sequence the pitch of this voice of braids. Oh, nice. It has a different length, so it's always changing. So this is one voice. Let's switch now. It's in latch mode. Let's switch to the second channel. For now, we still don't have anything, but we will use now the Simulus. Opala, this will go to the second input. Okay, so let's use first of all one sequence, randomize it to trigger the decay time to the sequence, sorry. Let's use, okay, I used it already. Let's trigger sequence the decay time. Oh man. And again, we use another sequence for pitch. I have here another sequence set. Okay, this is better. And then again, we can switch between them. So let's use another sequence from the voltage block. Let's use sequence 5, randomize it. Let's have it also with a different length. Let's say something like this. And use this sequence to trigger the switch. Let's randomize this again. Okay, now we can start adding the mimeophone to this. Maybe we'll go all the way wet. Let's again randomize this switching sequence. It's a bit too much. So now with the color control on the mimeophone, I can filter out those voices. They are quite bright, but now and we need some reverb. I'm not going to use the halo in this case because I want the repeats quite high and this can get quite noisy. So let's send this. If I take this out for a second, I can send this to the lovely Modus Versio, again from Noise Engineering. Quickly make this here. And we can start adding some reverb. This is a bit less ambient, I guess, but still it's a nice use of a switch, switching between two different voices, two different sequences, two different colors into one destination, in this case the mimeophone, and getting a more unique sequence. Okay, I have some granular or granulated pianos on Arbor here from Instruo. So let's send this also to the, let's use those cables here, also to the mixer. And let's use another sequence 6, to scan between the buffers. So Arbor has 6 different buffers. Okay, now it's going. And I have another loop on the looper, also from Instruo. So let's send the loop to the microcell just for some more reverb, because reverb is a must. And let's bring it in. Oh yeah. Okay, of course there's a lot more to explore with the switches and with this switch in particular, but I hope you enjoyed this video. I want to thank Ritual Instruments for sending me Pointeuse. I'm sorry, I cannot really pronounce this, but the switch, and Guillotine, the lovely distortion. Thanks again. And that's it. Have fun and cheers.